It's a pleasure to be with you.
Yeah, absolutely.
We met briefly through, I think, mutual friends at Summit, and had one of the more epic phone conversations I've had in the last year at least, for sure.
Yeah.
And I was thrilled to see you here at the Superhero Brain Conference, and enjoyed your talk. And I'm excited to connect.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we're going to be in the spirit, no pun intended, but we're going to be in flow. Could you tell me, first of all, just start off by talking a little bit about what you're up to with the Flow Genome Project?
Sure. So we are basically leading the charge on the research and training of peak performance states. And we work with a diverse variety of high-performing organizations, from Google to Red Bull to the Navy SEALs, as well as with regular folks. And the intention is to demystify what it means to get into the zone or get into flow states, and make that much more accessible to people, both for just quality of life and enjoyment, and then also for mission-critical things they need to do.
Can you describe, I mean, I think we've all, many of us at least, have been fortunate enough to have experiences of flow, whether or not we are in our analytical mind enough to recognize it. I think after the fact, you have a sense of it. But can you just give a description of what flow is?
Sure. So the simplest is just to say flow is a state of consciousness where you feel and perform your best. And we've all had those experiences, whether we have them a name. Most of us don't have a name for it. But it's those moments where we lose ourselves in the moment, we lose ourselves in the actual action or the doing, and we're just not thinking about things. And what not thinking about things is we don't have an inner critic. Not thinking about things is I'm not thinking about the past or the future. I'm deeply connected into this present moment. And typically when those two things happen, it's so awesome. It feels such a relief from the way we normally live our lives that we can't wait to do it again and again. And so those three things showing up of selflessness, right? No inner critic and normal voice. Timelessness, I'm not in the past, I'm not in the future, I'm only in the now. And effortlessness lead to richness. They lead to information richness, which means we suddenly have access, we're paying a lot more attention to everything that's happening around us, and we're making sharper, crisper connections. And that information is arguably the point. It's kind of it's the reason why those states are so valuable.
It brings to mind, as you talk about it, actually, I think about someone like Kelly Slater catching a barrel, or Michael Jordan, who I grew up with. When he would just hit the zone, he couldn't miss a shot.
Yep.
So I think a lot of us are familiar with sort of athletes tapping in, or at least in my mind's eye, a Shaolin monk being able to train to access it. But for everyday people, what are the ways in which you found through your sort of experimentation research? What are the ways that everyday people can access flow?
Sure. So the simplest, and the baselines are not actually magic bullets sexy. They're really straightforward, which is sleep more. Sleep more thoroughly, sleep more deeply. Hydrate and fuel our bodies with the cleanest food and water you can get your mitts on. And move more often. So fundamentally, the term researchers use for it is embodied cognition, which is that we're not just heads on sticks. Our brain, we have more neurons in our heart and our guts than we do in our brains alone. And that when you integrate all of those, you get much higher cognitive performance and overall well-being. And so the fundamentals are, eat, rest, move, and then the kicker is and breathe. And powerful respiration, not just remember to. Most of us have very poor air exchange, meaning that we breathe up in our rib cage. When we get nervous, it comes up even higher. As we do that, we don't exchange oxygen well. You get carbon dioxide pooling in the bottom third of your lungs. And what does that tell your brain? Is brains live on oxygen, and it gives us scarcity. It says this is a fight or flight situation. So one of the simplest and most powerful ways to shift your state of awareness and put you closer to flow states is self-aware breathing, meaning I know what kind of breathing I'm doing at what time. And it's not always just relaxed belly breathing like you might learn in yoga class, like, oh, this is how we were when we were babies and this is what you should do.
Sure.
That's one, and that's awesome for when it's awesome. But then for powerlifting or sprinting, and you see athletes harnessing focus breath, there are dozens of different breathing styles, rates, and rhythms, and each one of them changes the pH in our bloodstream, changes the oxygen, nitrogen, carbon dioxide mix in our airstream, and radically shifts our state of consciousness. So as far as cheap, portable, and wildly effective, control of our respiration is hands down the best thing to learn and invest time in.
Yeah, I've been looking into this a bit myself, and so I was looking at actually old Olympic clips and seeing kind of both the creative visualization, but also just this very unique breath patterning, right? So like different, as you said, from what I'll do when I'm meditating, right? Or like a pranayama, like actually like it was a very articulated form of a more sort of assertive breath. And literally they would be visualizing, particularly as a bobsled team, and it was them literally getting into states through their breath, which was much more rapid pace, and you could see them literally their head moving as they visualized the course.
Sure.
And so I was thinking about that form of state inducing, and then it also evoked in me that this Wim Hof, who I had just watched a film about, who can evidently swim for several minutes under ice cold water based on his breath. I'm sure you're more familiar with his work, and it may be very analogous to yours, but can you tell us a little bit about how that state is induced and any kind of insights you can garner from it?
Yeah, and actually my partner, Stephen Kotler, was just out with Wim and Laird Hamilton in Malibu a few months ago. And those guys are going way down the rabbit hole to the point where they are doing, in the ocean, very deep, focused, high-intensity breath before catching a big wave. And they're claiming that the states they're inducing are comparable to tryptamine level consciousness from breath patterns alone, and then going and surfing big waves in that state. So yeah, they are absolute balls out in that realm.
Wow.
So one, to how does this work? I always think of Galileo, right? Famously went into the clockmaker's shop and noticed that all of the smaller clocks all became synchronized with the biggest pendulum in the shop. And he's like, what the hell's going on here, right? So you've got sort of the largest pendulum, all others in the space cue off. And in a lot of ways, what respiration and respiratory control does is it's the biggest pendulum. So because it's affecting literally the gaseous mix of the air we're breathing and what our brain and our heart are juicing off, that then has a cascade of follow-on effects. So it affects our brain waves. It affects our vagal nerve tone. It affects our cardiac coherence. It affects our endocrine profile. Are we pumping stress hormones or more relaxed feel-good hormones? So you get a cascade of whole body brain effects that are all trackable and measurable. It's the easiest way to influence a whole bunch of them at once. And that's part of the reason why respiration is so potent.
So there's actually an interesting question that was asked of me, and I want to actually ask it in this particular context of state, which is, if there was one thing that you were to add to your life and one thing that you were to take away that would have the most transformative impact, what would it be? And you could ask that obviously in a generalized sense, but if someone were looking to induce state, like say you're in a place of acute stress, anxiety, or depression, or you're just looking to enhance your, shift your perspective / enhance your performance, right? So what would be one thing that you think would have the most profound impact in being able to induce that state shift? In terms of adding, and is there anything that you would want to take away in terms of thought patterning, behaviors, etc.?
And for me personally, or for folks in general?
I think folks in general, and then for you personally.
Okay. So I think, again, given low-tech, portable, can people actually do it? I would say the simplest would be 3 minutes on waking and 3 minutes before going to sleep of, at a minimum, deep, focused breathing with explicit gratitude and reflection. If you have the ability to download an app and use a heart rate variability monitor, and there's apps where you can just put your finger over the phone, over the camera, so you could just even having a little bit of biofeedback, so I actually know what's happening, that's helpful, but not necessary. But just coming out of sleep and going into sleep in as coherent and relaxed way possible is really helpful. And gratitude, the simplest thing about gratitude, people come at it from a relational or spiritual point of view. They say, oh, it's just nice to be grateful, and we ought to, and loving kindness and those kind of things. But there's just straight up neuroscience behind what happens when I think of and focus on gratitude. And you can be the most Machiavellian son of a bitch in the world and go, oh, it's actually benefits me to practice gratitude. Done.
Yes.
Because it creates new neural networks. It shifts our endocrine profile, it decreases stress hormones. It does a whole lot of beneficial things. And the other thing it does is the act of being grateful for the world as it's happening allows us to spend more time in the present moment. Because typically the only reason we get kicked out of the present moment is I would prefer a past, a perfect past, or a fantastic future that hasn't happened yet, or I want to get back to, right?
Sure.
There's a preference. And the moment we can practice gratitude, like George Leonard, right, one of the co-founders of Esalen, and he was an Aikido master as well, had a great line. He said, take the hit as a gift. Mm. So you can always learn as a practice, take the hit as a gift. Don't bitch and moan, don't piss about it, just take the hit as a gift. And gratitude is an actually very tough love practice. When you get to that level, you're like, okay, I'm going to take that hit, and how can I express true appreciation for that moment?
Yeah,
and that's transformative.
Obstacles as opportunities. So like,
yeah.
I've heard it articulated several ways, but I love that.
Yeah.
I mean, it is truly transformative. It's very hard to stay angry or stressed if you're in an acute state of gratitude. And in fact, I don't actually know if it's possible.
Yeah, and baby steps, right? I mean, we just say 3 minutes, because I mean, people get jacked out of deep sleep by alarm clocks. We go stumbling into the shower, wake ourselves up, pump ourselves full of coffee, and grab a burrito and jump in the car.
Right.
Like that just destroys transitional space. So just 3 minutes, slow breathing and reflecting on what we're grateful for. It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be like unicorns and rainbows. It can just be, I am going to conduct the exercise and build those muscles.
Mm. Yeah. And what about taking away? I mean, so, one of the things I've been exploring, at least in the morning with my morning routine, is, and there's a muscle that I built up, unfortunately, with the phone, right? So it's like going to the phone, whether it be social media, email, of course, all the myriad of things that you can distract yourself with. Yeah. But I find, at least for me, when I take that away for the first 2 hours of my day, it makes marked improvements on how everything proceeds from there on forward. I mean, is there anything that you really recommend sort of reducing in the essentialist context? Yeah, and certainly like tips like that. I mean, just keeping your phone at a minimum in airplane mode only when it crosses the threshold of your bedroom, hugely helpful and can interrupt a lot of shitty habits. But I think potentially one that may not be on everybody else's top 10 list would just be, it's like cognitive behavioral therapy light, which is don't think anything or say anything that you don't want to be more true. So what you appreciate, I've heard it said, what you appreciate appreciates. Yeah, for sure. But also in reverse, because we ruminate a lot. Sure. And we can beat the hell out of ourselves and other people a lot. I'm guilty of that, yeah. Right, we all are. I mean, and anybody who's seeking to achieve has probably learned a deficit model, right? Gap analysis. You close the gap. And so we're constantly fixating on the negative, but don't think it or say it if you don't want it to be more true. It, for me at least, has been a really helpful pattern interrupt. At first it's, I'm unconscious, I interrupt the pattern, I catch myself, and I have to steer to something more positive. And then it's more or less most of the time, and then it's only occasionally I get hijacked. And that's one of the most game-changing habits. Because then you get very kind of like Yoda about stuff without having to go all cross-eyed. I love that. Yeah. So what about for you personally? So the biggest add and then the biggest takeaway? Yeah. To increase more peak experiences in my life. So the biggest add would be 6 weeks next to a good kite surf break and 6 weeks with access to deep, light snow. So just those two, game changing for my quality of life and everything else. And I'm working hard in that direction. Yeah. And then take away. I think take away, I read something like last week, it said, if you're over 25 and you've still got weak spots in your game, you're always going to have them. Get over it and hire to cover it. And I was like, oh my God, yes. Yeah, of course, right? Of course. So I would love to be able to just outsource all things, bullshit administrative and financial, and just say, let me do the things I love and am drawn to, and let me offload that once and for all. I'm going to take that on. I'd love to be your accountability partner on that one. That would definitely revolutionize my life for sure. Oh, yeah. Well, tell me a little bit more about, I mean, I know a little, when we talked on the phone, you were talking, and I don't know to what degree you can share, but about, some physical space that you're working on in terms of actually helping to measure and offer opportunities for people to tap into flow state. Sure. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so it's called the Flow Dojo, and it's basically our solution to a whole host of problems around, peak performance, which is everybody gets inspired, and then everybody says, well, I'd like more of that, and how do I begin? And when all you've got is sort of top 10 lists or PDFs handouts, it's really hard for all of us to create all of the positive conditions in our life from scratch, and wildly inefficient. So we thought, well, what would it be like if we create a research and training center that is basically, you can picture a series of giant geodesic domes that sort of, and inside is, equal parts X Games meets Cirque du Soleil with a sort of layer of quantified self. So smart sensors, biotech, giant extreme playground equipment, mats, pads, bungees, everything to let people basically recreate the inputs and sensations that usually elite athletes have, and those are some of the clients we've worked with in our study group, and also our own personal passions. And instead of saying, well, I can't do that, right? I could pay a ticket to go to watch a Cirque du Soleil show, but I would never be able to do those things. We're saying, let's let you do those things safely. Let's connect you with biosensors and brain feedback, and then let's you train and condition your bodies and brains in really fun-ass ways, ways that really don't even count as working, but are allowing us to sort of upgrade our nervous systems and our circuitry to be able to hold more stably.
I love that, and I can't wait to experience this dojo. I have what that evokes in me is sort of the Malcom Gladwell, and a question really around that sort of 10,000 hours, which is, in the elite athletes that you've worked with, and the everyday folks you work with, is there a predominant quality that you see that's pervasive in those that are able to accelerate their access to flow state?
Yeah.
So is there an underlying quality? In other words, I think many people would ask, is it something, some people just have more innate capabilities, right? They're just born with it. Like, I can't be Michael Jordan. Maybe I can get better at shooting a jump shot, but I'm not Michael Jordan.
Yeah.
That said, there's also the sort of Malcom Gladwell where it's like you put in your 10,000 hours, you're patterning new grooves, right? You're creating those new grooves, and there is, demonstrated results that you can create. Neuroplasticity continues on throughout your life. Can you actually create these more sort of super states, what would be considered superhuman for you in this moment, throughout your life? And are these states sort of accessible to everyone, or is there an inherent sort of limitation?
Sure. Yeah, the short answer is yes, they are super duper accessible to all of us, and it's really just knowing the skeleton key for the lock. And there's a stack. It's obviously infinitely subtle, but one of the first is mindset. Do I come from a fixed mindset or a growth mindset? So basically, do I think that my performance or success in any activity is attributable to my fundamental character, who I am, or is it a result of my effort, process, and work? And Carol Dweck at Stanford has done lots of research with this, even did it with Formula One drivers, and tested them on what mindset did the drivers show up in. That correlated directly to how much flow they were able to get into. Because obviously it makes sense. If you have a setback and you instantly go into negative self-talk, or you're instantly projecting and getting pissed off, you're not gonna, flow could be all around you, you'll miss it.
Right.
So the growth mindset folks were like, oh, I'm bumping wheels with a guy, or oh, I'll get on the next turn, something like that, were more likely to find more flow, and their race results correlated at the end of the season. So growth mindset had more flow, had more wins.
Quick recovery as well, and not being thrown by failure.
Yeah, it's that old Chinese parable of good luck, bad luck, who knows? All the crazy things happen to the farmer in each time. He's like, who knows? And it's always just the play out of time, right? If we want to stop the clock and say, I'd like to suffer here and just grind gears because I've got a poor me story to tell, I'm going to milk it.
Victim mentality.
Right? That we can do that. Or you can just say, play a longer game, return to breath, don't flinch, and we'll get further faster. And so as far as other key success factors, I think the elite athletes and elite military guys have a totally different issue than the rest of us. Most folks, 80% of the population, need to learn to struggle harder. But when people come to us like, oh, flow, it sounds so groovy, awesome, never have to struggle again. You're like, no. Actually, always do the hard thing.
Yeah.
Always do the hard thing, and then you will have more flow. We're sort of crypto stoics when it comes to that, right? The obstacle is the way. If you do that, you're always leaning into the hardest thing, then you have access to more flow. Now, elite folks, it's actually the opposite. So most people need a loving kick in the ass to struggle harder. The total type A hard chargers need to actually know
Mm.
when to back off and recover more deeply.
Interesting.
So it's almost the opposite for those guys.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Any other sort of insights that you can share in regards to mindset or some of the things that you've seen?
Yeah, I would say the first is we have to retrain our muscle memory that I always have to be up, vigilant, and behind my eyes, making meaning. Because we have these moments where maybe we're just focusing on our breath. Maybe I'm just feeling good all over. Maybe I'm lost in the moment. But our reflex, our knee jerk, is almost always to go back to me behind my eyes telling stories. And so retraining that. And retraining that from like my ego being my operating system, it's just running the show, to ego is my user interface. It's just the apps on my dashboard of like, how's my brain activity, how's my heart state, how's my posture, how's my vitality, how's my rest, all these things, instead of back to good luck, bad luck, who knows, residing in the space in between the answer to that question and really just monitoring. And so it gets you to a really similar place as a lot of contemplative traditions and all that kind of stuff, without the tar baby of I'm trying to get rid of myself by using myself to get, and because that's sticky. A lot of meditation is like, God damn it, how can I not think about thinking?
It's what keeps most people from continuing to meditate.
Oh, it's mind-bending,
Yeah.
right? And probably not optimally tuned for Westerners, right? Because we have such strongly enculturated egos. I mean, I did some research in grad school on Native American vision quest pre and post Columbian contact. And the hypothesis was at least that, before Europeans, ego constructs and identities in indigenous populations were far more fluid. So you could spend 4 days fasting in a circle of rocks and high likelihood of having a visit from Great Spirit and a true vision, because the world was sanctified, it was sacred. By the time you got late 19th century, decimation of populations, corralling everybody to reservations, those kind of things, they needed the peyote of the Native American church, right, to overcome, right, a lot of the firewalls and barriers that, post-Enlightenment, Western, rational, egoic culture and memes had instilled, right? So the better we get at breaking through from those states without having to think about our thinking, the more fluid we can be. And at first, we spend any time not here, there's a panic movement, and we just jack back up and like, damn it, where was that cool experience I was just having? Gone. Right?
As soon as you start to dwell on it, yeah.
Yeah, and if we just try and have our ego do nothing, it's mischievous and wants to mess things up. So I think it's like occupy it. Give it something to do. Be the dashboard. And when it's the dashboard, then if I'm feeling sad, I'm like, okay, now I have a choice. I can kick back up into my story about why I'm sad, and the first person or plausible plot device, I'll puke onto someone else and animate that game, right? Or I can just be, sadness. Check vitamin D deficiencies. Get more UV sunlight. Increase heart rate. Move more. Right, and do those things, and then my mind movie is different, and I haven't had to engage, psychological narrative.
Well, I think one thing that came up for me as you shared is just that, oftentimes for me, when I started I lived in Sri Lanka for a couple of years and studied actually with an Ayurvedic practitioner. Okay. And it's in studying Vipassana, just like you said, my ego had been cultivated when we're very, very young, right? Yeah. So it was harder for me to quiet the mind. Then when I was first introduced to yoga, which made sense, now I understood that yoga is oftentimes a precursor to meditation. Okay. Being in the body, being in my body it was easier for me to access those meditative states because I had something to focus on other than me just trying,
my God, yeah.
So I totally understand that, experientially. And it's also interesting because I just did a refresh of a deep sort of Vedic training for meditation. Okay. And what the teacher was postulating, which I hadn't heard before, was actually many people presume that thinking, like trying to turn off your brain, is meditation. When in actuality that isn't meditation. It's about training the muscle of your brain to create more space between, like you're saying in a way, basically being able to tap out of the operating system driving you and you driving the OS, so to speak. And actually that the thoughts were, and this is sort of the deep level philosophy you got into, but the thoughts were in some ways, if your brain is an iceberg and most of our thoughts are subconscious, the 95% that's underneath the water, those thoughts are actually a releasing of stressing. He calls it a de-stressing process. So it's actually, in some ways, you're letting the bubbles up of those subconscious thoughts during the process. And so, for me at least, that was a liberating thing to say, okay, well, I can continue to sit, ideally after a physical practice, right, where I've actually prepared my body to separate from the OS, and in doing so, it allows me to access a deeper state of just like that breathing-oriented meditation.
Absolutely.
But have you found in what you're up to, and I know you work with some of the top, the peak minds of our time, have you found any, I hesitate to use the word, but hacks that people use to really, go about their day to help not have their OS sort of drive them, to tap back into the place where they are more effectively driving the ship, so to speak, to be at cause and not at effect?
Yeah, I mean, I think, some of them are, back to what we talked about already, which is like, pay attention to your vitality. Like, you cannot be, you're going to be in a fight or flight situation if your just energy level gets too low. And when, so pay attention to your energy level in aggregate. And that's everything from sleep, diet, rest, physical health, to quality of relationships, to engagement with work and life. I mean, there's no skipping steps. But if you just think of it almost like one of those rain gauges in the backyard, where it's like 1 inch, 2 inch, 3 inches. If you're below 3 inches, everything's going to suck. And you just need to focus on whichever lever you have easiest access to get your total water column as high as possible. And then it's that whole, you don't ever find the answer to the universe, you just stop asking the question. Right, and there's that certain kind of quietness. There's another phrase, Bob Keegan at Harvard, he's chair of their adult psych department. He has a beautiful phrase. He says, we go from having problems we try to solve to problems that solve us. And that kind of relationship with paradox, that kind of relationship with the struggles of life, versus just saying, and like Pema Chodron, I don't know if you know Pema's stuff, right?
Of course, when things fall apart.
Yeah, beautiful. And so she said there's something almost aggressive about trying to smooth out all the bumps and imperfections in life. So for me, I gain the most like comfort. I just feel grounded instead of like trying to scale the highest heights, being like, let's actually reconcile, right, the human experience with like actually what it is, lumps, bumps, and all, with also staying present and connected. That to me feels much more durable than some, blue sky, everything's going to be perfect when.
Yes.
Because I think there's been an awful lot of grief caused over time, whether that's by cults and commies and gurus and you name it, right? The subjugation of what's here and now feels maybe barking up a wrong tree.
Yeah. Wow. Well said. So what are you excited about right now in your life?
Well, my partner Stephen and I are finishing the manuscript on a new book called Stealing Fire, which is basically tracking the sort of underground revolution right now in access to all of these altered states. So everything from the guys in the Navy to what's happening in Silicon Valley to Burning Man to the neurobiologists to the technology to all of these things that are happening right now. And no one is sort of integrating, or at least no one that we've seen is putting together all the stories. They're all in silos. So there's stories about meditation and contemplation. There's stories about the psychedelic research renaissance. There's stories about flow states. But no one's saying, well, actually, under the hood, the neurobiological mechanisms are virtually identical, and this is actually part of something bigger. So, for instance, as soon as we did that, we worked with some economists, and we said, well, how much of our economy do we think, we call it the altered states economy, how much time and money do we think people are spending trying to get out of their waking selves? And we were conservative. I mean, anytime we could take a smaller subset and just do that versus some conjectural one, we did it. And we looked at everything from licit and illicit drugs to recreation and entertainment to sports to psychology, self-help, all of these kind of things. And it was $9 trillion. It's bigger than the GDP of Germany or Brazil. It's more than we spend on healthcare, education, child welfare. We practically tithe to the church of the ecstatic. And,
wow.
and most of it is dysfunctional and misdirected, right? But that is how much we are plunking down on an annual basis to get out of ourselves.
When you say dysfunctional and misdirected, give me an example of that.
Gambling, porn, things that are clearly not, I mean, people don't go to Vegas to get rich, right? And you don't watch porn to procreate. So the actual, right? They are clearly state-shifting devices, right? And you think about how much time, effort, and energy is spent in the and to say nothing of, I mean, you know, prescription painkillers kill more people than car accidents these days. You know, all those kinds of things where you're like, oh, this is heartbreaking, that this is what we're doing to ourselves because being in ourselves is so agonizing.
Wow.
You know?
What are some of the insights that you've seen in your research? I mean, is there profound? I mean, to me, I start thinking about different cultures and like ways in which. I mean, one of the things that struck me coming from a place like Sri Lanka was you talk about relationships and you know, time used to be measured by the rising and setting of the sun, you know, and now it's measured in tweets and Instagram posts, and you know, we're so our most of our physiology evolved over a very long period of time, but the modern world is presenting us with very new inputs, so to speak. And I imagine some of the dysfunctional aspects are ways of attempting to deal with that, that onslaught of inputs. Is there any like amazing kind of insights that you've seen in doing the research into like how the, you know, all these conversations that are happening, or maybe not conversations, I should say, experiences that are happening, whether they be drug states, meditations, these ways to induce altered states of consciousness? Is there any insights that you've seen in doing your research that has really kind of blown you away?
Yeah, and I'd say that kind of goes back to your earlier question, which was were there any insights from the top performers? Right. And so I think the simplest is that experiences of ecstasis, which is just to go back to the ancient Greek, which is ekstasis, just meant to step out of oneself. And the idea is that any experience that we can reliably and safely reproduce that provides ecstasis is, generally speaking, healthy and significantly beneficial. So Willoughby Britton at Brown University did studies on people who had experienced near-death experiences, right? So obviously a small and uncontrolled population, you don't go out recreating near-death experiences, but the people who had had them found themselves going into REM sleep at 120 minutes. And depressed people go into REM sleep as early as 60 minutes, and generally content people are at 90 to 100 minutes. So by measuring how long it takes you to get into a REM cycle, you can predict 6 months ahead of it actually happening, whether you'll have be depressed or be happy. People who had had one near-death experience were off the charts for overall well-being. So then at Hopkins, they did studies. They're like, okay, well, that's obviously ethically, we can't go around recreating this experiment. But they said, well, let's take cancer patients. And instead of, you know, because you couldn't do the magical combination of my tunnel of light experience, so let's take terminal cancer patients and give them 3 grams of psilocybin. So let's create something comparable as far as an experience of ecstasis, stepping outside themselves. And they had benefits that persisted 6 months to 4 years, as far as most significant experience in my life, overall efficacy, well-being, etc. Same thing happened with PTSD, with veterans, and flow states. So they did veterans coming off combat situations and putting them in surfing situations in the ocean, and their flow state experiences were almost lockstep comparable as far as results and efficacy. So it appears that it's not that, and of course you can't camp out indefinitely in altered states. That would be schizophrenia, right? Or addiction or delusion. What matters, and this is correlated with what we saw with Olympic athletes and Red Bull athletes, is it's not that there's a singular zip code in consciousness that is the ideal one to be in. It's range. It's like the suspension on a motorbike, right? You want travel to be able to absorb shocks and then extend. If it just took one and was done, then that's not very useful.
Right.
So what we want is versatility. We want the ability to be highly integrated and focused in our waking state with our responsibilities, our roles, our commitments, our obligations, and we absolutely need the ability to set that down for a while and to be able to step out of it and experience expansiveness, information, inspiration, right? The silence and the quiet, and then get back in, right? So our monkey suits, right? Our roles, our identities, my work, my job, my name, as long as we realize there's a zipper to those damn things, then we can put them back on and off. Right? We don't need to go streaking down the street like Will Ferrell in Old School, right?
Yes.
You know, but there's such relief. It's like Atlas Shrugged, right? But he just needs to shrug for a little while, get the kinks out. He can pick the world back up again if he just has that moment.
Yeah, you need the weekend to be productive during your week. I mean, a very basic analogy, but yeah, I get it. Like
no, and to that point, I mean, what we talk about is hedonic calendaring, which is really how do you pace your pleasure? Because when you get really good at it, right, the first thing is like, I'd like more of that, please, and then people go off the rails.
Yes.
Right. So it's why there have been orthodox right-hand paths. Thou shalt, thou shalt not, because they had to write the rules for the masses, for the lowest common denominator. But there's a left-hand path which just says work with everything, right? And arguably, ecstatic states is left-hand path all the way. Sex, drugs, rock and roll, right? And the reason they get persecuted, vilified, is because they're the fastest route with the lowest success rate. Right, so you could, but if you calendar it, there's a really elegant way to do it, which is you say, here's my daily practices. What's basically just 100% wholesome and good for me. I do it every day, and that's the gratitude, that's the rest, that's the movement, the meditation, all that kind of stuff. Then there's a weekly. Make it a Sabbath practice. That's a little bit of a blow out the pipes. Let me touch, right, those really good feelings, and then once a month. Once a season, once a year, and once a year is blowouts. That's your trip to a Peruvian shaman, or your visit to Burning Man, or your going and a 100-mile ultramarathon that takes a month to recover from, right? You can do it 1,000 different ways, and then the game is if it starts getting too hot, right? Because that's what happens. You're like, first of all, we're like, I don't think this could really happen, and you're like, oh no, shit, it can happen. This is very doable. So then you're like, I don't freak out and be like, oh, I got to stop everything. You're just like, just move it to the right.
Yes.
That's the game. So you get to play with still some strictures. And then we would just add in, how do you know if you're kidding yourself? Because you don't. Because right, you're shifting your neurochemistry, so you're going to buy whatever story you're telling.
Right.
So you have periods of enforced abstinence, like Lent is a great example. Yom Kippur is another one, right? But I mean, make use of cultural ones, or sign up for your own, and have a minimum of 4 to 6 weeks cold turkey on all your vices, indulgences, and pleasure seeking, and just observe how itchy. How sticky is this?
Fallow the field, so to speak.
Yeah. And then you can come back to it and be like, okay, now I know my relationship with this again.
Yes. What for people who have, I mean, I'm fascinated by what you're talking about. I can't actually wait to read this book. But for people who have challenges in the self-discipline or the self-awareness, right? Because inherently, like if you're talking about ecstatic states, oftentimes it leads to beyond the rational mind, right? So,
for sure.
So therefore, without, how do you prevent yourself from going too deep down the rabbit hole? I'm guessing, do you find that there's, whether it be accountability in terms of, a friend, a close, someone, a journey partner, so to speak, are there ways in which you can sort of check without being overly measured to make sure that you're on the path if you do have kind of a more prescriptive, because it sounds like what you're talking about is almost this sweet spot in the tension between flow, freedom, total release, and the structure necessary to keep that actually in a healthy place.
Absolutely, it's full-on middle path, and it's the idea of like liberating structures. So that the structures it's like training wheels on a bike, like they're there when you need them, but they're not the moment you have liftoff.
Right.
And so I would say practice partners are essential. I mean, it's a whole nother ball of wax to go into the mountains or to go into the oceans in big conditions by yourself. So friends, swim buddies, training partners, romantic partners. I mean, many of the most transformative relationships I'm aware of, whether that's Aldous and Laura Huxley, or whether it's Alex and Allison Gray, or Sasha and Anne Shulgin, right? They were dyads. Or John Lilly and his wife, right? I mean, the folks that have gone some of the furthest expanses in the last half century did it together, did it as part of couples. And the ones that haven't didn't all come back in one piece.
Yeah. A friend of mine said it actually in a slightly different way, and I love that you actually drew out examples, but he said there are no single presidents.
Yeah.
And I was like, it's true, because to operate at that level, whatever presidential is for you, there's got to be a great consort. There has to be that.
And a grounding and balancing element. I mean, the analogy that always comes to mind for me is it's like freehold breath diving, where those divers go as deep as they can into the ocean just on a breath in those scuba tanks, and they see how far they can go. And once you realize that ecstatic states give you access to kind of the infinite information layer, like it's just as big as it goes. You're like, it's fractal turtles all the way down, man. So you can lose yourself in it. And the same way that divers would experience like nitrogen narcosis, and they get, and, you know, the stories where the mermaids lured them into the deeps. You know, they got high and blown out, and then got so entranced that they just forget to come back, right? And that's the paradox. Because with the divers, like if I wuss out and I come back too soon, I'm like, damn it, there was more goods down there.
Right.
I could have gone a little further, but if you go too far and you can't get back to air and sunlight, game over. It doesn't matter what you saw down there. Right? So that idea of like, it's infinite, it's infinitely infinite. So wrap your head around that first, and then say, I can only go as half as far as I can hold my breath.
Yes.
You know, Ed Viesters, the famous Himalayan mountaineer, had a great line. He says, summiting is optional, getting home is mandatory.
Beautifully said.
Yeah.
As we sort of look to wrap up, I have just a couple more questions. One of which is, if you were to say, give 3 resources, whether that be a book, like if you God willing, you wind up on an island with absolutely phenomenal windsurfing and in the mountains somewhere, soft powder, and you find that place where flow is induced on the ready. What 3 things are you bringing with you, and or if you could only, if all data was going to be wiped out and you could share nothing else, what 3, whether it be books or individuals or a quote or a mixture of the 3, what would you recommend for people to tap into to delve deeper into this topic?
Okay, good question. I would say, so now you've given me a variety of choices.
Absolutely.
Okay, so I would say probably, I love that Tom Robbins book, Jitterbug Perfume, which is all about the Bandaloops, this Himalayan, like they have hot baths and gymnastics and live forever. So that's, I think, as far as like a fictional great tale of what this is all about, I love that. As far as music, probably the Led Zeppelin's Zeppelin 3 Side B, which I didn't, I mean, it's sublime and so distinct from anything else, and I didn't realize until I was reading a Rolling Stone article, they actually recorded it in a cottage in the Cotswolds in the summer. So they got like full on like hippie druid. They got their game on, and that's what came out. So Zeppelin 3 Side B, and then probably the quote from the Talmud, which I heard it and it like gave me goosebumps the first time, which is, "We are not expected to finish the work, nor are we excused from it."
That's amazing. I'm tempted to end there, but actually you just evoked one more question, which is, and this will be the final question for now, but it's in 2 parts. If you were to write a letter to yourself, 15 years ago,
okay,
what counsel would you give yourself in terms of the next 15 years?
Yeah, like that in the 15 I've just lived.
Correct.
Okay.
And second part of that is, if you were to be writing that letter to yourself 15 years from now, what do you hope will have been achieved?
Okay, interesting. Wow. Okay, so for 15 years ago, I would say, wake up, pay attention, love your son, he turns 17 today.
Oh, happy birthday. What's his name?
Lucas.
Happy birthday, Lucas.
Yeah. Love your son and do the work.
Beautiful.
Absolutely. Constant kick in the ass.
Yeah. I love that. Yeah. And 15 years from now?
Okay, so this is me now teleporting a letter into the future that I'm going to read then.
Yeah, Lucas is now 32.
Wow. Okay. Spoil your grandkids. There's no better revenge. Goodness gracious. I would say, let's think.
It's a bit of the legacy question, right? Like you're not going to be near your deathbed by any means in 15 years. You have a lot more life to live, but what do you really
keep
hope
moving,
to be like?
Keep moving, keep writing. Yeah, and love your grandchildren. I mean, I said it like from another angle as well, which is like legacy and family, and that really being everything.
I couldn't agree more. in that spirit, I think it's time to let you get back to Lucas. I'm so honored that you took a little time to be with us today, and I greatly appreciate it, and I'm really looking forward to next time.
Yeah, for sure, man.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Pleasure.
absolutely.
Yeah.